By Juyi, purchasing flowers. In the imperial city, spring is about to end. Rumbling, rumbling, coaches and horses pass by. Everyone is talking about the peony season, following the crowd to purchase flowers. Cheap or dear, no standard price. The cost matches the merits of the blossoms. So brilliant a red, 100 flowers. So much the price, 5 bolts of white silk. Above, an awning shields them. Alongside, a wattle fence protects them. Sprayed with water and coated with mud, after transport, their beauty does not fade. In each household, it's become a custom. Everyone continues to be obsessed. An old farmer fellow, who happened by the flower fair, head bowed, only uttered a deep sigh, a sigh that nobody understood. One bouquet of those deep-colored flowers would pay taxes for 10 common households. So we continue this series with a poem by Juyi. Now, Juyi is a poet that was included in the 300 Tang Poems anthology. We've read, I think, 6 poems of his that are included in the said collection. The reason why I am including him here, and I'll probably include a couple of poems of his more, is that I believe he is one of the underrepresented. Now, Juyi is arguably one of the greatest poets of the Tang Dynasty. He was also arguably probably not only the most prolific, but probably one of the most relevant poets of the mid-Tang period. I would say Bai Juyi is there on the same level, if not higher than Han Yu and Meng Jiao. And no, we could say mid-Tang poets are not that well represented in this anthology. Now, Bai Juyi was very popular in his day because of the simplicity of his style, and that in fact made him even more popular in other places like Japan, where he became the #1 Chinese poet to be read and appreciated and even incorporated into plays. Now, the poems of his that were included in the anthology are pretty representative ones, especially the Pi Pa Chi or the Chang Hen Ko, the Song of Everlasting Regret, or Grasses, which was the poem that he composed for an examination. But they're good poems and they're representative poems. But, Bai Juyi was an extremely prolific poet. I think he is the individual from whom more poems written during the Tang has been preserved. And, he made careful copies of different volumes of his collected works and placed them at different places. So there are thousands, literally thousands of poems by Juyi that have survived. So we're not going to talk about his biography, that has already been done in other videos. Connected to the poem we read today, called Mai Hua, Purchasing Flowers, which is one of a series titled Qin Zhongjing, Songs from Qin. We will just say that this is a very characteristic poem in the Confucian moralistic, satirical, and allegorical type of poetry that Bai Juyi and Zhuan Chen made famous through the Xin Fu, the new ballads. So Bai Juyi actually wrote a series of poems that, like some of Du Fu's were basically poems of social criticism. And this poem is a very good representative. Other ones that he had were, I don't know, the Old Man with a Broken Arm, which was an attack on militarism, the Old Charcoal Vendor, about official harassment, or the White-Haired Person of Shangjiang Palace, which lamented the fate of palace ladies. Now, I'm not sure if that perhaps was one of the ones we read, the Palace Song. So these social issues poems, which sometimes read a bit prosaic in translation, represent very well at least one strand in Bai Juyi's principles. This connection with antiquity and this connection with a socially oriented type of poetry. So moving to the poem we read today, which is, I think it's an old style pentasyllabic poem from what I can see in the book I'm consulting. So Again, this is a poem of social criticism. The story, the plot is pretty straightforward. We're in the capital in Chang'an. It's the end of spring, the beginning of the period of flowering of the peony blossoms, the mutan, I think, yeah. And these flowers, create a huge craze. Everybody wants to buy them. They are beautiful and exorbitantly expensive, and their high prices contrast and their luxuriousness with the tough realities of peasants, the majority of Chinese population, who suffer and who, with the money that a bouquet of flowers costs, could pay taxes for, 10 whole families. So a social poem, a social criticism. What is depicted here is a reality. This is not a hyperbole of Bai Juyi. From other sources, from other books that I've read, and from the fiction of the period, it is pretty obvious that the Tang dynasty were obsessed during the Tang. The people in the capital, the aristocrats and the refined people, were obsessed with peony flowers. They became almost a symbol of the whole Tang dynasty. They were cultivated in many gardens. Many parties were staged in gardens just for the purpose of viewing peonies. New varieties were being developed. So this was an authentic craze during the Tang dynasty. And this poem represents this craze very well. To imagine a more contemporary, or not contemporary, but a more Western style similar situation, you can imagine the tulip craze in Europe during the 17th century. So a similar thing. And yeah, this poem, which is pretty narrative, pretty straightforward, some parallelism, but no very complex rhetorical tropes, at least in the translation. This poem just tells the story. We're in the capital. Flowers are being sold. They're beautiful. They're being sold for very high prices, and this is the subtext of the poetic persona, of the poetic voices. Look how stupid, how wasteful such an endeavor is. The prices of these flowers, and then these people in the city, these aristocrats and gilded youths and merchants and capital people who represent an infinitesimally small portion of the population of the empire. These people dwell in these trivialities and these frivolities, while the peasants have difficulty in paying taxes. And the cost of these flowers is way above the cost of even 10 families paying taxes. Okay, let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet, but we won't be stopping much because, as I said, the poem is pretty straightforward. I'd say it has three parts. You could say the first couplet introduces the chronotope. It locates us in the imperial city, that is to say in Chang'an, and chronologically it also situates us in spring, late spring. Spring is finishing, summer is beginning. And then the main part of the poem dwells on this flower craze. It's peony season, flowers are being brought, they're described, their high prices are mentioned, the obsession that people have for them is developed in the main block of the poem. And finally, the last three couplets give us this shift from the deluded masses of the capital to the old farmer who, glances critically at the situation. So let's go. First couplet. In the imperial city, spring is about to end. Rumbling, rumbling, coaches and horses pass by. So, as I said, we're in the capital, in Chang'an, and it's the end of spring, and the image of coaches and horses passing by rumbling, that's a stereotypical vision of the city. Chang'an was a city with more than 1 million people. It was a capital, so it was a very crowded, a very rowdy city, and poems that depict it, usually, almost conventionally, start by mentioning the massive traffic, the massive circulation of people and goods that a city like Chang'an would generate, and mentioning usually also the big avenues and the winding alleys. So here we have this vision of movement, of trafficking, of lots of people, or lots of busy people, with the coaches and the horses moving all along. And this is in the capital. Second couplet. Everyone is talking about the peony season. Following the crowd, to purchase flowers. So the second couplet introduces us to the real topic of the poem, which is it's peony season. People are obsessed with the flowers. It's interesting how it continues the images of movement implicit in the first couplet. So in the first couplet we have those carriages and horses moving around. In the second couplet we have these crowds of people moving around to buy the flowers. Third couplet. Cheap or dear, no standard price. The cost matches the merit of the blossoms. So the blossoms, well, this is a pretty straightforward statement. The prices of the blossoms vary. So different colors were valued more than others, and of course, flowers in better condition or better looking would be more appreciated than not so better looking. So there's just this marketplace sort of mentality. There's not one standard price for these flowers. The prices go steeply up or down depending on demand and quality, on the merits of the blossoms. This image of merit, I imagine, it includes an implied irony, like, blossoms, merit. If you're thinking of merit is very important for Confucian scholar officials. Like they hope to accumulate merit and to therefore be worthy of employment in improving the state. But the merit of these flowers, which can rake up high prices, is just their beauty. So a frivolous, superficial thing, that's their merit, that they're beautiful and appreciated. Yeah. So brilliant the red, 100 flowers. So much the price, 5 bolts of white silk. So this is a typical pluralistic couplet, and in one line we have, the flowers depicted as being brilliantly red. There's lots of them, maybe 100. And the second couplet, the first was about brilliance, the second is about price. Yeah. And, they're expensive. 5 bolts of white silk, that's quite a lot of money. In Tang China, money was used as it had been used previously, especially copper coins, which were a small currency, actually. For big payments, you probably required not coins exactly, but pieces of gold or silver. And silk. Bolts of white silk, unadorned, unpainted, were generally used as payment. And there are also grains and cereals, but the bolts of silk became the standard unit of currency for middle range payments or even expensive payments. And the government had a lot of them because part of the taxes were paid in cloth by farmers, in cloth and in grain. So, some of these flowers, very expensive. And next couplet. Above, an awning shields them. Alongside, a wattle fence protects them. This is yet another pluralistic couplet. The first couplet was about the price, not the first one, the previous one depicted this variety of colors and this variety of prices. This couplet, therefore, once the great value of these flowers has been established, the great monetary value, this couplet moves us to the things that are done to protect such a valuable object of merchandise. So an awning, so people might be homeless, but the flowers have a home. That is, an awning shields them from the elements, and a wattle fence also protects them from any horizontal attacks. So the vertical and the horizontal dimension protect these flowers. They have a dwelling of their own, well, it could almost be said. Next couplet. After transport, their beauty does not fade. In each, sprayed with water and coated with mud, after transport, their beauty does not fade. So these flowers, as we said, they're luxury items. They're treated with the maximum delicacy. They're carried, they're probably transported with a lot of care. So they continue to be beautiful after transportation. So, transported with care, and they're cleaned, like water and mud might have dirtied them a little bit, but they're sprayed with water maybe to clean away the mud, and they are transported and their beauty continues. Because again, they have to be treated by the sellers with the utmost care so that they can sell them for a good profit. Next couplet. In each household, it's become a custom. Everyone continues to be obsessed. So this couplet finishes the main section of the poem where we've been describing these beautiful flowers, their arrival at the capital, the high prices they gather. This final couplet in this block summarizes all the information. So this is a craze, this is a custom in the capital to buy these expensive flowers. Everybody is obsessed with this. Everybody? Only the people in the capital. That is what the next section will introduce to us. The common sense of the poor peasant who, cannot but reflect sadly on the frivolousness of all this racket and all this expenditure. An old farmer fellow who happened by the flower fair, head bowed, only uttered a deep sigh, a sigh that nobody understood. So the peasant is the discerning one, and he is acting as the spokesperson for the poet himself. And he doesn't say anything, he just sighs, and that sigh is very significant. A lot of classical Chinese poems end with the poetic persona sighing, because they end on this sad note, provoked by the circumstances, usually the seasons, and the sadness that is implied in the passage of time, in the passage of the seasons. Here the sigh is a sigh at the wastefulness, at the frivolity of these urbanites who, dwell in this atmosphere of luxury and prosperity and spend huge amounts of money on something as fragile and as inconsequential as a flower. And nobody understands him. He is discerning, he is wise, but the people in the city are deluded. And, the poet is not. He is like the peasant, and he empathizes with the peasant's suffering. The peasant's knowledge does not come from deep wisdom, although he's old, and age generally comes with greater degree of wisdom or knowledge. But, his living conditions make him see how frivolous it is to spend lots on flowers, while peasants don't have enough money to pay their taxes or for eating. Last couplet hones in this point. One bouquet of those deep-colored flowers would pay taxes for 10 common households. So the prices of these flowers are so exorbitant that, maybe he is being a bit hyperbolic here, but it depends on them. The flowers, Juyi himself said, they don't all sell for the same price. So some bouquets of these flowers are expensive enough to pay for the taxes of 10 households, of 10 peasant households. So that would be calculating at least, let's say, 4 or 5 people per household. That would be 50 people's taxes, yearly taxes, are the equivalent of a bouquet of flowers. So that's the point that is being made. So a very didactic, straightforward poem. You could argue against it, perhaps, as beauty is beauty, but what's the price of beauty? And what are the social consequences of dwelling in beauty? Remember, Juyi, social thinker, social poet, he will criticize luxuriousness and excess in everybody, especially in the elites, but in everybody, as a frivolous wasting of resources, while the peasants, the majority of the people, have to suffer.